misogynistic comments. But the government did not really play a part in that. They were working to maintain calm, keep the public well informed and all of those sorts of things, taking proper precautions to fight the virus that was breaking out here. And then Ya as well has a couple of let's say tone deaf comments, like one where she says that she blamed the attacks in Vietnam on class jealousy, which it doesn't actually really exist here, which I know might seem odd to people in the U.S. where rightfully so, there's a lot of criticism of the wealthy, whereas here wealth is admired, really. Like, for example, President Trump, a lot of people here like him simply because they think he's rich. That's his image. And in fact, less than a week after the sister came back to London, another wealthy young Vietnamese woman was flown, her family flew her back to Hanoi from London on a private jet because they knew she had coronavirus and they didn't want to risk her flying commercial and infecting other people. And this action was applauded. People were really impressed by this family doing this. They thought it was very responsible, even though it must have cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars or something like that. So wealth doesn't really have anything to do with it. And then, yeah, she also blamed the reaction in Europe on racism, which I don't know, that probably played a part. But then there's a quote where she says, if this was Paris Hilton, there would not be so much fuss, which that's just a strange comparison. I didn't understand that one at all. Hey, Paisley in Syracuse, thanks for watching. And then further down, there's also a bit where they talk about releasing a some sort of, I don't know, beauty product line in the next few months, which is reads as just free ads, which is kind of weird for the New Yorker. Anyway, so the article has a lot of problems from the Vietnam perspective, and what's equally interesting is the reaction this has gotten in Vietnam. If you go to the New Yorker's Facebook page, their post about this article has around 40,000 reactions and I think around 14,000 comments, whereas the one before it was around 100 reactions and like a few dozen comments. So this is surely among like one of the most interacted with posts in New Yorker's Facebook page history. And if you scroll through, it's almost entirely just furious Vietnamese commenters, some leaving thoughtful comments, others less thoughtful. But this has really struck a chord, and in some good ways and some bad. So a lot of it, unfortunately, is just sinking into more misogynist attacks of these sisters, which is terrible, but also a little ironic because it seems like this family is working to try and rehabilitate their image, but by doing this, they've completely destroyed it. And it's odd because this all happened in March. Vietnam everyone here had moved on, wasn't even thinking about this family anymore or these young women, and now it's all over the place again, and they're just coming in for more abuse. But also concerning is how people have reacted towards the New Yorker and DT Max, the writer. So just for context, Vietnam does not have a free press at all. The media ecosystem here is much different from what you would have in the US, and ethics are not as strong as they would be in the US in terms of reporters. So a lot of people here are assuming that DT Max got paid by this family from Hanoi to write this story, which would certainly not be the case, especially for a publication as illustrious as the New Yorker. So that's concerning. It shows a pretty poor understanding of how journalism works in other countries. But I also do wonder, why did the New Yorker decide to write about these sisters? How did they come to their attention? I know the New Yorker, which is a phenomenal publication, I'm a subscriber to it, has one of the world's most stringent fact-checking processes. So I do wonder how they miss some of the stuff that's in this article, like that, characterizes the Vietnamese response poorly, gets a few things in the timeline of the sisters' travels wrong. So it's unfortunate because Vietnam doesn't get a lot of coverage in Western media. I mean, a lot of it in the US especially is still kind of focused on the war or the legacy of the war. And New Yorker, it really doesn't get much more high profile than that. So for them to decide to do something about the country, but kind of get it wrong and also write about an extremely wealthy family is I don't really understand why. There's much better, more interesting and more relatable stories than I'm not dismissing, or downplaying the abuse these young women got on social media. That's awful. Everyone who has played a part in that, should be ashamed of themselves. Um, Also don't want to dismiss their experience of actually having COVID-19 and having to go through treatment for that. Thankfully, they're healthy now. They recovered. Um, but the way they were presented in here as basically innocent victims, completely innocent, and then Yaz quotes about them being attacked because of their wealth. Just if you know Vietnam, if you're familiar with how things are here, that's not the case. But yeah, so again, this is the public shaming pandemic, pretty long feature published by the New Yorker this Monday. If anyone else has read it, if anyone watching has read that, please chime in on the comments. I'd be curious to know what other people think, because I'm guessing people outside of Vietnam do not realize how how much this has infuriated people here and really, really touched a nerve on social media. I mean, it's all over Facebook. Twitter is not very popular here, but there's been discussion of it there. Reddit, people are commenting with a lot of anger towards both the New Yorker and these sisters. So it's pretty interesting to see. Again, this kind of came up out of nowhere because, again, this all happened back in March. And yeah, it came out of nowhere. The reaction is kind of unlike almost anything I've seen in terms of Western media covering Vietnam. So yeah, quite the quite the few days for this here. And I guess just in other news, other than this, things are going really well here. We've gone over 3 weeks now with no detected community transmission of the virus. The Da Nang outbreak that started in late July has ended by all accounts. Today, interestingly, the first commercial flight, inbound international commercial flight into Vietnam since March 25th, flew from Seoul to Hanoi. So that's a pretty big deal. I think it was about 100 passengers. They all did get tested before they left, tested upon arrival. They're all going into quarantine. And it's not tourists either. I think it was mostly Vietnamese citizens coming back from South Korea. So certainly not a normal flight, and there will be no normal flights here until there's a global vaccine. I don't know, next year at some point. So don't intend on being a tourist in Vietnam anytime soon, but that was a pretty big deal that they are very, very gradually reopening to limited commercial flights. If anyone has any questions about how things are going in Vietnam or what's going on, or any thoughts on this New Yorker public shaming feature, would love to hear. I don't know how this article was, received or how it's read in other parts of the world. I'm guessing not as angrily. I was pretty upset when I read it. It was just frustrating seeing Vietnam portrayed like this. So Peter asked, what's the biggest concern that the public has now regarding COVID? I think right now that the virus seems to be gone from the community what happens as more international flights are allowed? Again, quarantine will still be in place, but if more people are coming in, that obviously raises the risk of potential exposure to the country or within the country. So I think just people waiting to see what happens with international flight. And Peter also asked, what am I most upset about in regards to the article? I think I'm most upset about kind of the depiction or the insinuation of Vietnam as like this evil communist government that is, scaring its people and throwing people to the wolves if they got sick and just blaming everything on them, which, again, as I said at the start, there's a lot to criticize Vietnam about. There's huge problems here, as any country, of course. But when it comes to coronavirus, the response, again, there are issues, but by and large has been superb. And it's especially a little rich reading this from an American publication where they're asking if, Vietnam are these actions too far or something like that, when the U.S. has completely failed with its pandemic response, throughout this year. Um, so yeah, I think just not allowing any nuance in the conversation about yes, Vietnam is a communist government, but that doesn't mean it's like, subjecting its people to daily terrors. That Paisley asked, what are the quarantine rules in Vietnam right now? So they remain pretty strict. If you can get in, and that's a big if, it's 14 days um, in a hotel that you pay for. Previously, it had been centralized government-run quarantine at army facilities and those sorts of things, or university dorms. Um, yeah, so if you can get in, you have to get tested before you leave, tested when you arrive, taken to quarantine, and then if you test negative, I think now if you test negative 2 or 3 times, you can get out of quarantine within like 6 or 7 days. But it's up to 14 days and then if you test positive in quarantine, well, it takes longer, obviously, depending on your how much treatment you need. So even the Vietnamese citizens that are coming back, everybody has to be quarantined still, and very strict testing regulations in place as well. Um, Also on that flight from Seoul that came in today, all of the passengers were in full protective bodysuits, eye goggles, masks, gloves, all that sort of stuff. So it was a commercial flight, but it did not look like what we would consider a commercial flight before all of this started. Emily asks, what should we know about the situation in Vietnam right now that the article didn't talk about? I mean, so for the article, like I know the focus wasn't how things are in Vietnam right now. That wasn't what it was about. It was about public shaming and harassment. So I didn't expect it to go into what things are like in Vietnam at the moment, but it made no mention of how well things have gone here, especially relative to a lot of other countries. So I think the main thing you should know is that things are going really well here. Again, it's over 3 weeks now with no known community transmission of the virus. Bars, restaurants are open. We can go see movies in the cinema. We can fly domestically. You can take buses. There's no or very minimal social distancing regulations. Everyone feels really confident about being out and about. Um, it, of course, there's still economic damage. There's no international tourism. Exports are key here, and international economies are hurting. So there's a lot of pain in the industrial sector, but by and large, daily life here is, well, for people in the US, would be shockingly normal. um, I mean, we can kind of do whatever we want, still taking, some precautions, wearing masks and things like that. But yeah, by and large, things are going very well, which you wouldn't know from reading the article. But again, that wasn't its point, but it like wasn't mentioned at all. Um, but yeah, I guess so I do recommend reading the article. It talks about people in a few other parts of the world as well, but Vietnam is definitely, if you look on their Facebook page, it's just all comments from Vietnamese people or people talking about the Vietnam aspect of it. So it seems like the rest of the article was almost ignored, which as a writer, I would feel bad about that, but that's the way it is. So I may talk about this a little more on my next broadcast, if because I don't think everyone's had a chance to read it, but I do recommend checking it out. It came out on Monday, written by D.T. Max, who I'm not familiar with, but is a New Yorker staff writer, I guess. Um, I am curious what the New Yorker uh, thinks of the article or their response to it, because they must have gotten on Facebook. Yeah, I'm going to log off in a minute. It's getting late here. But let me know if there's any final questions about Vietnam or how things are going here, or if you've read the article and have any thoughts on it. Yeah, no problem, Paisley. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, just a personal note, I mailed in or dropped off my ballot for the presidential election at the U.S. consulate here today, so I was excited to fulfill my civic duty. Hopefully it gets there before the election. Oh, thanks, Emily, for watching. Yeah, well, I'm gonna log off then. Thanks everybody for the great questions and for watching. And again, I was talking about the New Yorker article called "The Public Shaming Pandemic." Also, if you want to learn more about Vietnam from my perspective, I write a weekly newsletter on Substack called Vietnam Weekly. Um, if you just go to vietnamweekly.substack.com, you can subscribe for free. Um, and yeah, I'd love it if people subscribed on there. It's free.